Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this podcast.
It's great to be here with you. Great to be at Hilltop.
Yes.
This is my new favorite coffee shop in Los Angeles.
I think we call that pandering, but we'll take it.
It's true. It's true. The coffee's good. The mission is good. Getting to meet Yoni and AJ and talking to them or listening to them about how they started it and why they started it, and being from this neighborhood and wanting to serve this neighborhood. No, I'm all in.
Yeah.
I'm all in.
Well, very good.
It's also perhaps the only coffee shop I've been to in Los Angeles, but it's still the best. It's still the best.
I think all the pandering points you just tried to give me, just erase them. But this is actually my favorite place. I take my godson to Hilltop on the way to school when I have him almost every morning. And it's a community business that's near and dear to my heart. And so I'm hoping as we talk more about your agenda overall, we'll get into issues that they care a lot about.
Great.
But to break the ice, I have a rapid round first.
Okay,
So
there we
sip
go.
that
Let me have a
coffee
sip
real
of coffee,
quick.
yeah.
And then I have 10 rapid rounds for you.
Ooh,
You ready?
I think so.
It's going to be quick.
All right.
Okay, and you can't have both answers. You have to
I have to
pick
pick
a
one or
side.
the other?
Yes,
Okay.
there's not good people on both sides here. You got to just go with it.
Okay. You got it.
Okay. So first is cheers or different world?
Cheers.
Oh, Beto, quick.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 is Biggie or Pac?
Tupac.
That's good. You're on the West Coast.
Yeah.
3, your favorite season, winter or spring?
Spring.
Okay. Running mate.
Oh,
This stuff you getting up to the coffee sip. Okay, I'll let you pass
Yeah.
that one. Black or white?
black.
Okay, all black everything. Beto, we see you. The next one is somber. Is R. Kelly going to jail? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Trump or W?
W.
Okay.
If we have to make the choice.
If you have to make the choice.
We have to make the choice.
Lakers or Clippers?
Lakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then age of first girlfriend?
12.
12. And then
Brittany Look, Masita, elementary, 7th grade.
Whoa!
Yeah.
That was memories. That took you right back there.
Yeah. To Live and Die in LA, I think we went and saw that movie together, and that was my first kiss. And we had a signal. We were holding hands, and if one of us squeezed twice, that meant that we were going to kiss. That was my
You
first
were
kiss.
being real
We
fast,
thought this
Beto.
through.
You had a
It
strategy.
was programmed.
Okay, all right. The last one is Robert or Beto?
Beto.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beto. All right.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, I wanted to just hop right into how you got the nickname Beto. How did you get the nickname?
So I grew up in El Paso, and it's a border community literally connected to Mexico. And part of that connection is our culture. So that if you're born Robert or Albert or any name that has Bert in it, so Umberto is another one, or Isiberto, then more chances than not your nickname is Beto. And so I was Beto from day one, but Beto is not uncommon. So you have Beto's Tacos, you have Wood Floors by Beto, your mailman is Beto, and the guy who's running for president out of El Paso is Beto. So that's where it comes from.
And so one of the things that's been really interesting to me to watch is kind of your trajectory. I was done working on Capitol Hill when you came in. You served a little under 4 terms, right?
Yes, served 3 terms.
So 3 terms, and then you announced a Senate run. Before your Senate run, what was your proudest accomplishment in the House?
Delivering for veterans. So when I was running for office in 2012, and you know this, we unseated a long-term incumbent, heavily outspent in the race, won the race by going door to door, literally knocking on 16,000 doors over the course of 9 months and listening to people. And far and away, one of the most consistent issues that came up was how hard it was for veterans who'd come back from Vietnam, who came back from Afghanistan, came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, to get into the VA and see someone. And the wait was literally taking their lives. That wait time essentially became care denied, was connected to 22 veterans a day in this country, every single day, taking their own lives in America. When we know that if they got connected to a psychologist or a therapist or just a visit in the VA, that could literally mean the difference between life and death. So El Paso was the worst in the country in wait times for mental health care for veterans. We turned that around, made it a priority, hired up. I started just recruiting people on my own. If you were a psychologist in America, watch out. You're going to get a phone call from me trying to get you down to El Paso, Texas. And that worked. And then we took the lessons learned and applied them to what we want to do nationally, expanding mental health care access. And I did it as a Democrat in a Republican majority.
The one thing I said is to turn the phones off, y'all. What is that? I know I just said the NWA ringtone, but that one too, please.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So just being able to get that done in a Republican majority Congress was no small feat, but really important because those veterans whom I'd met and their family members, even more insistent and perhaps more importantly, we're going to make sure that we did this. And I knew at the end of the day that I answered to them, feared their judgment, wanted to deliver for them, and we did. So, it's not a sensational issue. It doesn't grab the headlines. It's not going to put you on CNN at the top of the hour, but it's so important. And I'm so grateful that we got to make progress on that. Mission is not accomplished. Still a ton of work to do, but I'm very grateful that I got to be part of that effort in the House.
And you just talked about something that I think is frustrating to a lot of people, whether they, pick sides or they find themselves somewhere down the middle. And that is kind of the partisanship that we see hamstringing agendas in Congress on both sides, on the Senate side and in the House side. How confident are you, in spite of the gerrymandering that we've seen in the House, that you would be able to push an agenda through as president?
Part of that confidence has to be built on winning races in 2020, in addition to the White House, U.S. Senate, adding to the majorities that we have in the House. But hope you would agree that in the state houses, which are going to control redistricting after 2020, really important to establish or add the majorities that we have there. One of the nearest and best opportunities is Texas, where we are under a dozen seats away from being able to command a majority for the first time in really my adult lifetime. That's an exciting prospect, and it's fundamental to answering your question about how you get the most ambitious agenda ever proposed actually accomplished, or how you face the greatest array of threats that we've ever known. 10 years within which to act on climate change. The world's largest prison population, disproportionately comprised of people of color. 10 million immigrants living in constant fear of being deported. If we're going to do any one, much less all of those, we're going to need partners at every level of government. And then I think as president, in addition to making sure we're on the right side of the most important issues, making that case in communities all across the country, never ending the campaign. So going to not just Los Angeles, not just El Paso, but going to Missouri and Ohio and Iowa, North Dakota, and helping the constituents of those members of Congress make the connection to the policies that we propose so that they form the public pressure to get their representatives and senators to do the right thing. I think all of that has to be part of the strategy to answer your question.
And you talked about ambition in that answer. What do you say to the folks who say, okay, you ran for Senate, you did not have a successful Senate run, why the presidency? Is that ambition that doesn't make sense? Is it blind ambition?
Yeah. So no is the answer to your question.
Like rapid response.
Yeah, no is the answer to your question. In Texas, something really special happened last year. Though we did not defeat Ted Cruz, we were 2.6 down at the end of the night. We won more votes than any Democrat had ever won. And importantly, also won independents for the first time in decades, won nearly 500,000 Republican votes as well. 500% voter turnout increase amongst young people in Texas during early voting. This constituency that is always written off. Beto, don't go to colleges and high schools and HBCUs and community colleges because folks don't vote in those places. And our contention was they don't vote because no one has shown up to listen to them and include their stories in their campaign. And we did that. We helped to elect 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats replacing Republicans, helped to flip the House. 17 African-American women elected in Harris County, literally changed the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States, and a state that until that point had been 50th in voter turnout. Not because we love democracy less than you do in California, but to your point about gerrymandering, based on the color of your skin or your country of national origin, you were likely drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote or the chance we would ever hear your voice. We've neutered and denuded the Voting Rights Act, and there are no protections right now in Texas in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams would be the governor if the voter rolls had not been purged of hundreds of thousands of names. The case I'm making is that against those long odds, we perform not just far better than expectations, but set the stage to also win those 38 electoral college votes in Texas, which far and away would do more than anything else to put Donald Trump away. You know, a defeat that is decisive, so that there's not a closeness that he can exploit to call into question the results, which you know he's going to do if he's still president of the United States come November 2020. We have to make sure that this is a clear, decisive victory. No state can produce that better than Texas, and I don't think there's a candidate who can win Texas in the way that we can, or has the chances that we have going into 2020. So that's our case that is also premised on what we just saw last year in Texas.
Mm-hmm. And there are two things that I want to kind of tap into that you mentioned. One is the criminal justice system in Texas specifically, but you also talked about the legitimacy of votes. I continue to call Donald Trump an illegitimate president because of all of the reasons. But Mitch McConnell has election security measures that he's not considering won't get to the Senate floor because they benefit from the hacks. They benefit from the lack of security around our voting processes and the inconsistencies. What things can you tell voters when it may not be of direct benefit to you right now, but it certainly will be, right, come 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think that election security, guaranteeing the integrity of the vote, the sanctity of the ballot box. You mentioned Mitch McConnell. We know that President Obama and his national security team on a nonpartisan basis approached the leadership in the House and approached Mitch McConnell in the Senate and said, look, screw party and the outcome in this election. We now have clear evidence that Russians have invaded our democracy, and we need your help to stand up against it. And in that instance, as he does almost every time, Mitch McConnell put the prospects of his party ahead of the fortunes of this country. So knowing that, we have to make investment in election security a priority going forward. And you mentioned whether or not it helps us, we just got to do it for this democracy. A new Voting Rights Act that ensures the impediments that we described in Georgia, in Texas, in the states of the former Confederacy are absolutely removed. For people of color against whom they've been employed since the end of Reconstruction, but also for other populations. I think about Americans living with disabilities, more than 30 million, who very routinely tell me it is really hard for them to cast their vote and have their voice heard in democracy. Same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, and automatic reenfranchisement of those who have served a prison term, have paid their debt to society. The onus should not be on them to go re-register. They should automatically be included back in their democracy. Our estimate is that brings 55 million of our fellow Americans into the rolls, into the ballot box, and an ability to shape the outcomes of our elections. If you couple that with getting big money out of politics, so I don't take PAC money or corporate help or special interest contributions, no lobbyists can contribute to our campaign. If we do all of that, we begin to get a democracy that begins to work for everyone in America. We've never had that, to be clear. It's nothing to restore. There's nothing to go back to. It never was in America, but it could be if we set our minds to it.
Yeah. And then going quickly to the criminal justice issues you raised, I'm sure that the recent sentencing of Amber Geiger in the Botham Jean case is something that is, I hope, disturbing to you, but it's certainly top of mind. So speaking of criminal justice reform and the things that are needed to ensure parity and equity in the CJ reform process, what do you think of her sentencing and some of the ways in which his family, the victim's family engaged, the judge engaged with Amber? What are your thoughts on that?
There is so much that is so telling about the criminal justice system in the case of Amber Geiger and her murder of Botham Jean. Starting from the very beginning, her ability to walk into his apartment and shoot him and not face any real immediate consequences. The fact that the Dallas police leaked the fact that there was a small amount of weed in Botham Jean's apartment, this is classic in American criminal justice. You know what? Maybe she did walk into his apartment, maybe she did murder him, but he had drugs. As though that would excuse what she did. The fact that the judge, to answer your question about the judge's involvement, said that the defense could use the castle doctrine, which is the stand your ground in somebody else's apartment while you murder them. And it is a necessary exercise to imagine the races and the roles reversed. If a black man walked into a white woman's apartment and shot her dead in that apartment, they never would have released weed. They never would have had a stand your ground.
They never would have released him.
That's right. And I think the 10-year sentence, I do think it was incredibly powerful to see Botham Jean's brother hug Amber Geiger. I thought it showed his power. That was something only he or that family could do, and they chose to do it. But I saw there was a really great segment on Trevor Noah where he talked about the power of white women's tears and the sympathy that evokes in America writ large, at least in some parts of America. And I thought his conclusion on this was very compelling to me. He said, what if the desire were not for Amber Geiger to be sentenced for more than 10 years, but for all the black men who are locked up for the rest of their lives, for multiple life sentences, for decades on end, who've been shown no compassion or empathy, no hugs, no tears would move anybody in their case. What if they were shown the same level of compassion or leniency or whatever the word is for what the judge provided for Amber Geiger in that case? I thought that argument was really compelling. And let's think about the fact that we have 2.3 million locked up right now, disproportionately comprised of color, in some cases for possession of a substance that's legal in more than half the states in the country. So a lot of work for us to do. I think there was a lot that was telling in that case, but a really important moment that I think has forced the conversation that you and I are having right now, which is a good one for America.
It's really tough because when I consider just how the hug made me feel, and I'm a Christian, I was just like, God really isn't through with me yet. Like I can't even imagine hugging like the killer of my dad or my brother. I can't, especially when coupled with the sentence. It just was tough. And you had another really powerful moment, I think, connecting people to El Paso and shooting victims. It was one of your less filtered moments, and I think for that I really appreciate it. I'm like, you see humanity right in this race for president. And so I want to talk to you for a moment about that. Has that mass shooting, I know that you are already a gun control advocate. You said some things that have really disturbed conservatives about their guns and taking their guns away. Have you softened your position at all, or are you still like, there's no reason for you to have an AK-47 or an AR-15?
That's right. I cannot make a logical argument that there's any reason for any civilian to own a weapon that was designed for war, sold to the militaries of the world, because that high impact, high velocity round, it expends all of its kinetic energy inside of your body. It's what it was designed to do. There's a guy who's in the hospital right now in El Paso, 10 weeks after the shooting on August 3rd. One bullet went through both of his kidneys, his liver, hit his intestine in 3 places. They've cut so much of his intestine out, it's a wonder that there's anything left in there. And he's not through the woods yet. You don't need that AR-15, AK-47 to hunt, to defend yourself in your home. You really only need it to kill people. So ensuring that not only do we stop the sale of those weapons, but the 16 million or more that exist, buy every one of those back, and then also make sure, and this point driven home for me in Chicago when we visited recently, that we don't just look at the sensational mass casualty terror attacks, the 22 killed in El Paso, the 7 killed in Midland, Odessa, the 58 killed in Las Vegas. They're all important for us to look at and learn from. But meeting with mothers who lost their sons in Chicago, their sons' names may not have even made the headlines, may not be in anyone's consciousness right now. In some cases, their sons killed by police officers with complete impunity. One mother described her son trying to break up a fight. The police arrived, he ran, was scaling a fence, and was shot by the police officer when he was at top of the fence, fell down, and his body left there for the next 13 hours. And she wants to make sure that I know that that is what has happened, and that I feel accountable and responsible for making this right. So gun violence, wherever it is and from whomever it comes, has to be addressed and called out and changed. And I think we have an extraordinary opportunity to do that right now because of those moms. Their group is called Purpose Over Pain. Because of Moms Demand Action, March for Our Lives. There are a lot of people who are changing the political calculus in America and making this possible. And I think we're going to be able to do it.
We have spent a lot of time this year talking about the 400th year, the year of arrival for the first documented enslaved African. And as a result, for the first time in my adult life, reparations wasn't a kitchen table conversation for my family and some of, the other Black families that I know. It's, traditionally been taboo. For the first time, it really sounds as if it's more of an accepted policy area for Black people. I'm curious to know, from your vantage point, I know you've been supportive of the concept. What is the way in which you see reparations not just being something that is palatable for white folks who don't want to accept that this country owes Black people something, but in a way that really makes this a successful policy position that moves and is signed into law? And I think I'm going beyond H.R. 40. As you know, even when Congressman Conyers was still in office, he introduced that bill every term.
Right.
And Ms. Jackson Lee's now taking it on. But what about the steps beyond studying and developing proposals, but to actual implementation?
I think just having a common page of history from which we can start is so important. I've been so impressed by the 1619 Project on the New York Times website, as well as other efforts to bring us all onto that same page. And the argument that finds a home with me is that we mark the foundation of this country, not 4th of July, 1776, but August 20th, 1619. First time someone's kidnapped from West Africa, brought here by force, and then made to begin to build the wealth and the greatness that both they and their descendants alive today would be barred from fully enjoying and participating in. Despite everything we like to tell ourselves about ourselves, these victories in the Civil War, these victories in the Civil Rights Movement, you have 10 times the wealth in white America. You have than you do Black America. You have a disparity as young as 5 years old in a kindergarten classroom, where a Black child is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or expelled. I used to think about, as a white guy, insofar as I even thought about it, that schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline I would sometimes hear about, that begins in high school. It begins when you're 4 or 5 years old in a kindergarten classroom. You are completely defenseless against the system into which you were born. Maternal mortality crisis, 3 to 4 times as deadly for women of color. So we know that whether it's criminal justice or the economy, healthcare, education, the ballot box, I mentioned voter suppression in Texas and Georgia, it is in every aspect of American life. And I think that when you look at other countries that have made more progress on coming to terms with their history, they were almost forced to do that. Someone brought the example of after the Holocaust, everyday Germans were made to go to concentration camps and to gas chambers, so they could never deny what had been done in their names. After apartheid, you had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. After the massacres and near genocide in Rwanda, Hutus and Tutsis brought to the same page. We've never, as a white majority, been forced to have that conversation in America. And so I agree with you. We have to go beyond Sheila Jackson Lee's bill, but I do want to stress the importance of that bill and forcing us to be on the same page. And then to figure out what that repair at the root of reparation looks like. There are policies from criminal justice reforms to capital getting out to small business owners of color, women of color, for example, starting and growing small businesses at 14 times the rate of the average in the United States. We propose doubling community development finance institutions to get more of that capital deployed into those communities. But all of those steps to some degree are piecemeal until you look at this comprehensively through the lens of our history and through the opportunity of reparation and through a commitment of discontinuing visiting this injustice on every future generation. But I think that table convened by Sheila Jackson Lee's bill is the place to start that conversation. And so many of the people that I really admire on this issue, including Brian Stevenson, have really stressed the importance of the story that we all learn in common.
So the other thing that I think is fascinating about this, you shared in a post that your great-great-great-grandfather was a slave owner, owned 2 Black women, Rose and
So Eliza?
Eliza.
Yeah.
Rose and Eliza. And just the chills I felt from saying their names. It's not an unnamed, like even when you go to Bryan Stevenson's museum and there's name after name of folks who were lynched and you don't know who they were. Like just knowing that there is a connection to their names and that type of acknowledgement. Are you pushing friends of yours, elected officials in this race with you, or candidates in this race with you, elected officials who you served alongside, to do that same type of deep dive and dig into their own past? Absolutely. And also to confront your own personal and family history, which at first, I'll just be really honest with you, when a reporter who discovered this brought this to my attention, I thought, well, what does that have to do with me? That was so many generations ago. Certainly, I did not cause this. I have nothing connected to it beyond the bloodline in my family. You sound like the Twitter trolls who responded to me when I was saying that, there's slavery, and they're like, I didn't own the slaves. It's like a visceral defense. Absolutely, and I just want to be very honest at that. I was sitting with my wife when we learned this, and I said that to Amy. I was like, I don't see what the deal is. And you found out she comes from a descendant of slave owners, right? And then we forced ourselves to talk this through. And, it is very clear when you look at the history that their ability, my ancestors' ability to build wealth literally on the backs of others that they owned, in some way, once it was accrued, was able to be passed on generation to generation, giving that next generation a better shot at success and accumulating their own wealth and opportunities and passing them on to their children. By contrast, Rose and Eliza were never able, literally by law, to amass any wealth, maybe not able to even see their children and their descendants going forward. And so history worked in the exact opposite direction for them. They were always at a loss, behind the starting line, every generation going forward. And that, to me, helps to bring into greater focus this issue of reparations, that yes, I am very much connected to this. And really everyone in America is today, though we would like to believe that myth, that and some of us would, and especially white America would, that we're past that. We're post-race. We have a black president. We had a black president. Everything's cool. It's like, of course they gave us this black president. Right. Now you're going to pay. So then we got this dummy. Yeah. Sorry, you can't agree. Well, maybe you can agree to that. But it's just like what we took a step for. Sorry, you guys. Yes, I just had a meltdown. We took a step forward and took 52 steps, 50 years back. Right. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, no, everyone should have that conversation and should do that search in their family's history. I think it is healthy for us as a country. I think it's really important for us to do individually. I think Donald Trump might own slaves right now. I think he might. So I think he might. Well, and let me not make you answer it. Let me say this. The other day he held this what can I say? I don't have anything nice to say. Do you know who Uncle Ruckus is from Boondocks? No. So you need to make sure you see Boondocks. But Uncle Ruckus is this black man who I'm confident if he ever took the face off, it's a white person living inside of him. There's a conservative who I will not name because I don't want to give her any more power than she has. She helped to host a conference at the White House with Donald Trump with black Trump supporters. He goes in and Donald Trump, probably for the first time since he was born, says to black people in the room, "You built this country." Which I'm like, is this his way to avoid impeachment? Because he's never, it was just like this astonishing moment where it's like, yeah, duh. But this is also the same man who says, make America great again every chance you get. So I'm just curious to know, when you consider places of alignment with Donald Trump or places where you agree, I know you agree with him that we built this, but how does that comport with everything else he's done and said when you consider his policies for and really against communities of color? Yeah. So while he does not own slaves, are we sure about this? What we are. What he has done is this foundational, systemic, endemic racism that we were just talking about that has manifested itself in every part of American life. At least presidents prior to Trump have at least mouthed the words that they want that more perfect union, that they want to overcome that. He's the first in my lifetime, and maybe since Andrew Johnson, who is publicly, in the most racist terms that I can even imagine,
denying not only that myth, but any chance that we're going to make progress under his administration on these issues. So we know what he said about Mexicans and asylum seekers, the killers, the predators, the animals, the infestation, the way that we talk about insects and animals, asking for women of color duly elected by their constituents to the U.S. House of Representatives to go back to their country, to describe Klansmen and white supremacists as very fine people. Those are the things that he said publicly, and we've heard about the shithole nations. We've heard about him saying, the only folks who come from Haiti have AIDS. I want more immigrants like the ones in Norway, maybe the whitest place on planet Earth today. So he has sent the signal that has been duly received by those who would act on this, like the gunman who drove from Allen, Texas, 600 miles, posted a racist manifesto before he walked into that Walmart and killed 22 people. And that manifesto echoed almost word for word, did echo word for word some of the things that President Trump has said. So I really want to make sure that we understand as a country, it isn't just that he offends us. He is changing us in fundamental ways, inciting violence. We see hate crimes on the rise every single one of the last 3 years, not just against immigrants and Mexican Americans, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the mosque that was burned down in Victoria, Texas, a day after he signed an executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States. He is inviting and inciting violence against communities that don't look like or pray like or love like the majority in the United States. And that not only is mortally dangerous to our fellow Americans, it will once and for all, left unimpeded, tear this country completely apart. And that's exactly what is happening right now.
I know you are in favor of impeachment of this president. What do you think about Democrats' strategy, though? So they are just now, you're smiling because I'm putting you on the spot, but I think it's so important.
I'm happy to answer.
We have evidence of at least 3,000 conflicts for this president, but the impeachment inquiry didn't go forward with Speaker Pelosi's blessing until there was an attack on what appears to be, in some instances, the heir apparent for the Democratic nomination. Because let's be honest, we do heir apparent in this party. So for them, now that Joe Biden is attacked, now, I'm just saying this is how Donald Trump supporters see this, right? So now it's okay to go forward with impeachment, and it's probably the most politically motivated moment that they could have gone for.
You're right in that the grounds are so much greater. The high crimes that the president has committed, the potential articles that could be drawn up for not just inviting Russia back in 2016, but then actively obstructing the investigation once he was president, lying to investigators, which Bob Mueller called out, firing the principal investigator, James Comey, trying to fire Bob Mueller when he was the principal investigator, defending Vladimir Putin on that stage in Helsinki, Finland. Then not only inviting President Zelensky to do the same of Ukraine, but asking China in broad daylight. And there's nothing about doing this out in the open that makes it any less criminal. You add to that his defiance of the emoluments clause, his ability to enrich himself through his position of public trust and his family. And then I've got to say this, and the first time I was asked about this publicly, I think, to my memory, at a town hall meeting in Waco, Texas in 2017, I said the president's open racism and that incitement to violence against Americans based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin, to me, that is an impeachable offense because it literally tears at the very fabric of this democracy, as well as puts the lives of our fellow Americans in jeopardy. And, for whatever it was worth, that was my opinion more than 2 years ago. But to your point, I think if we tell the American people this is narrowly focused on only this one crime, as legitimate as that crime is, we can now not tell the American people that they were right to suspect that all this other stuff was a crime, because even though we hold power, we're not going to bring that stuff forward in the impeachment inquiry. And so folks can then be forgiven for wondering, well, maybe he didn't really say all that racist shit, or maybe that stuff with Russia was okay, or Bob Mueller was wrong, because Democrats are in power, they're moving forward with impeachment, and they're not bringing any of that stuff up. So I think I understand politically why the the speaker is moving with this very narrow investigation. I just think for the sake of our democracy and rule of law, include every law that the guy has broken into those articles. Then we really make it clear to everybody what's happening or what has happened.
The other thing that's been interesting is watching who gets credit now for this impeachment inquiry. Super frustrated. I think it was last week too, where they had 6 white women in the House who were like, "These are your impeachment leaders," and I'm like, "I'm sorry." As we sit in LA, have you all not known who Queen Maxine is? Like, or Congressman Al Green from Texas,
That's right?
They've been championing this for a long time on the House floor doing 1 minute talking about impeachment, and so I'm curious to know. As you started talking about impeachment and how reckless and lawless this president is, who were your impeachment leaders?
Yeah, you mentioned Al Green and Maxine Waters, both of them so fiercely outspoken and unafraid. And I'm not sure in the case of Chairwoman Waters, but in Congressman Green's case, he received death threats right at the outset. And he was also laughed off by other Democrats. "Oh, this is crazy. He's Don Quixote going up against windmills," when he had very legitimate constitutional grounds, as did Chairwoman Waters, for the case that they were making. Politically unpopular, didn't poll well, wasn't convenient for the 2018 midterm elections, but absolutely on the right side of history at the right moment. And you're right, they deserve some credit now that it is popular, that a majority of Americans support this, that impeachment is moving forward. They were the early leaders who were unafraid on this issue. And I really want to make sure, and I don't know all the details of the impeachment investigation, I really want to make sure that they're able to play the central role that they deserve, given the fact that they were on this before literally anyone else in the House and almost anyone else in the country. And I think that's only just, and frankly, it's only going to make the case stronger because they've been working on this for so long.
I wish that were going to happen too, but I think that's going to be tough. As you start looking forward, well, first there's an immediate thing. You have another debate coming up.
That's right.
As you consider what you need to do to kind of break through, I think that it's safe to assume you're not where you want to be in the polls. Correct.
That was a very nice way to put it.
Not where you want to be in the polls. So what do you think about breaking through? To me, I know, when you have that moment in the spotlight, the pressure is on to perform, and sometimes people overreach and do something that falls super flat.
Totally.
What are you hoping to do in the next debate?
Yeah, it's an amazing trick to try to pull off, which is to acknowledge the importance of that moment, the amount of pressure that's on you, and then to act in a way that defies that pressure and looks at that moment just as it would be any other. I think to some degree in Houston in the last debate, I was able to find that place where, in the previous 2 debates, I'd been so loaded down for Bear. Here's the opposition research on Kamala or on, Bernie or on whomever, none of which I wanted to use because they're not my enemy. They're not the problem in this country. It's Donald Trump and the direction that we're headed. So freeing myself from that and just focusing on what it is I want to do for America. And, was asked a question about institutionalized racism, which I just answered in the most direct, honest, most passionate terms. Same on gun violence. And it really, almost overcame me because I'd just been in Odessa where I'd met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot and killed and bled to death in front of her mom because the ambulances couldn't get there because so many people had been killed across that community on that day of mass shootings. And I just felt so responsible to them. And I felt like I needed to speak for them on that stage. And it really connected with people. So I think that's my task, to be honest, to be authentic, to give voice to those I've heard, especially those who aren't often invited to the table, are not often heard on a debate stage. I need to do my best to represent their interest, their urgency, and their passion. And then I've got to just be respectful of the will of this country. If there is a case for my candidacy, I'll do my best to make it. People will respond or they won't respond. And at the end of the day, I remain committed to serving this country and doing everything I can at this defining moment of truth. I really feel this is make or break for America. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we make it through and overcome what we see in front of us. As a nominee, we're supporting the heck out of the nominee, whoever that is.
Okay, then that's a good question. If you're not the nominee, who are you going to throw your support behind?
you wouldn't expect me to say anything other than the following, which is it's impossible for me to think about.
Oh, come on, Beto. You've been so real and raw. I thought I could bring back my rapid fire. It would be the run and make route. I was gonna.
No, I didn't answer it the first time. And
okay, top 2.
Yeah.
What?
That's really good. That's really good.
Keep your head up, Beto. Look up there and tell me the truth.
Good vibes only.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing?
At Hilltop.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Really
I
appreciate
appreciate it.
Grateful.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Hilltop. Thank you. Gracias.